Got to get my mic on. 64 days into this administration, President Biden named Harris as the border czar. And with Harris at the helm, the Biden-Harris administration made good on their promise to systematically dismantle President Trump's secure border. Don't believe me? The numbers speak for themselves. In February 2021, the country witnessed a 174% increase in southwest border encounters compared to February of 2020. On their watch, there have been over 9.6 million illegal immigrant encounters nationwide. Experts estimate that the number of known gotaways, illegal immigrants who evade capture, those gotaways exceed 2 million. In May of 2021, CPB encountered over 180,000 individuals attempting to enter the country illegally along the southwest border. That was a staggering 675% increase from May of 2020. Since fiscal year 21, 378 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list have been apprehended at our border. And perhaps the worst stat, we've lived through 39 months where total encounters have been higher than even the highest month seen under President Trump. Yet border czar Harris couldn't be bothered to even visit the border. It took her a total of 93 days to make a token trip to El Paso, 800 miles from the sector experiencing the worst numbers. To say Harris has not taken the border disaster seriously is generous. Just ask the Border Patrol. Former Border Patrol Chief Ortiz stated, and I quote, "I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem," end quote. Current Border Patrol Chief Owens felt her absence as well, reporting that the VP has not spoken with him since he was appointed in 2023. Dereliction of duty doesn't even begin to cover it. This isn't leadership. This is sheer incompetence. And sadly, every day Americans are paying the consequences. Victims like Laken Riley, Ruby Garcia, Alex Wise Jr., Elizabeth Medina, Melissa Powell, Rachel Morin, and Travis Wolf were just a few of the Americans whose lives were cruelly stolen by migrant crime on this administration's watch. In southwestern Pennsylvania, my congressional district is one of the epicenters of the opioid epidemic. Since House Republicans passed H.R. 2, over 17,000 pounds of fentanyl have been seized at the southern border. That's enough to kill over 3.8 billion people. The People's House has an obligation to cut through the noise and give voice to the Americans left behind by this White House, and that's exactly what we're doing by bringing up H.Res 1371. With that, I look forward to the testimony from our panel and welcome the opportunity to move this measure to the House floor. I now yield to my good friend and ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really can't believe we're here doing this stuff. But in any event, Mr. Chairman, I can only describe what we are doing today as sad, pathetic, useless, and totally unserious. It is sad because the United States Congress should be a place where we advance legislation that actually helps people. Instead, today it is being used as an arm of the Republican National Committee, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Trump campaign. The Rules Committee hearing room is being used for a campaign rally right now. It's pathetic because it shows how afraid the Republican Party is of Kamala Harris. You guys are melting down. You're calling her the border czar, a title Republicans gave her, by the way. And I should say for the record, she is Vice President Harris. The White House never called her that. The President did not call her that. But I understand your desire to make things up. This resolution reeks of desperation, and everyone can see why you're doing it, because you are afraid. It is useless because this is a simple resolution that is not an actual bill. If it passes, it will not become law. It will not go to the Senate. This is as useful as an RNC press release or a Trump Truth Social rant. And it is completely unserious. Are you kidding me? How do we know this is unserious? We know because if Republicans were serious about the border and dealing with immigration, they would have joined us to do something about this problem. They've had plenty of chances, and they have done nothing, absolutely nothing. On day one in office, President Biden and Vice President Harris put forth a bill to create a fair and just immigration system, but Republicans refused to act. Fast forward to this year. President Biden and Vice President Harris worked across the aisle to put together a historic bipartisan immigration bill. But Trump told Republicans to kill it, and they did. It was a bill that conservative Republican senators said was really, really tough on the border. And Republicans killed it. They killed it because instead of solutions, they wanted resolutions attacking Trump's political rivals. And I know how this is going to go. I mean, the other side is going to rant and rave about numbers. We already heard that. And they're going to tell some really very sad stories about families that have been impacted by our broken immigration system. These are serious stories, stories that break my heart. But what they won't do is do anything about it. Make no mistake, this is a meaningless, feckless, slanderous resolution that won't help a single grieving family. It won't do a single thing to make our country safer. It won't reduce our deficit or strengthen our border. It won't create a logical and humane immigration system. This is about one thing. We are here for one reason. House Republicans want a chance to bash someone they are afraid of so they can demonstrate allegiance to their dear leader. And to top it all off, this is an emergency meeting. You heard that right, everybody. This is an emergency. Not an emergency meeting to fix the border, but an emergency meeting to bash Kamala Harris. That's the emergency. Are you kidding me? The emergency is that Donald Trump is losing and they're in a panic. And he's so unpopular that they need a meaningless resolution to try to prop him up. Now, I get why he's unpopular. Maybe they should call on him to step aside, considering how rambling and unfocused and boring he's become. He's the oldest presidential nominee in history. And I'm hearing from a lot of people he should step down. They're afraid. And so they're trying to tear down an incredible visionary leader in a last-ditch attempt to try to help him win. With an emergency, meaningless resolution. A non-binding resolution carries no actual weight. This is a stunt, a press release to deal with a political emergency. Look, the way Republicans run this place is a bad joke. This country has real problems and real challenges. And this is their response? This is their response? They are not fit to govern. Instead of serious legislation, we get a series of bad Fox News sound bites. And again, this is a sad, pathetic, useless, and totally unserious resolution. And let the record show that Republicans rejected a bipartisan border security deal so they could offer one meaningless resolution after another to complain about a problem that they refuse to solve. And with that, I yield back.
Thanks, Ranking Member. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome to our panel Representative Michael Guest and Ranking Member Thompson from the Committee on Homeland Security to the witness table. And Chairman Guest, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Rushenthaler. On March 24th, 2021, an unprecedented crisis at the southwest border was beginning to explode. President Joe Biden announced that he was naming Vice President Kamala Harris as his new border czar. In that role, Harris would be responsible for determining the root causes of the border crisis and presenting solutions to the American people. Now, more than 3 years later, after more than 9.5 million encounters nationwide, 200,000 Americans dead from fentanyl poisoning, and countless lives ended or shattered by illegal aliens released on President Biden and Vice President Harris's watch, it's safe to say that Kamala Harris's job as border czar has been a complete failure, and that the policies that she has espoused have actively unleashed the worst border crisis in our nation's history. Even before the vice president became border czar, she was signaling to the American people how radical she would be on border security issues. For example, in 2018, then Senator Harris stated her support for tearing down immigration and customs enforcement, saying, "We probably need to think about starting from scratch." In 2019, she declared that she supported decriminalizing illegal border crossings. Yet this is the person that Joe Biden put in charge of interdicting on his behalf this self-inflicted crisis. Vice President Harris' track record while in office has been disastrous, and it's clear from her own statements and actions that border security means nothing to her. Despite being border czar, she has made only one trip to the southwest border, a highly scripted visit to a processing facility in Texas in June of 2021. Vice President Harris has not been back to the border since that time. According to one Border Patrol agent, he said she literally has done nothing. She came to the border once and we sanitized all the aliens out there to make it look good, end quote. This visit only happened after she was challenged on national television by NBC's Lester Holt, who called her out for not having gone to the border despite her being charged as border czar from President Biden. I allege to you that she has also lied to the American people about the crisis that she, President Biden, and Secretary Mayorkas have created. In June of 2022, in a response during another NBC interview, she falsely declared, "The border is secure. We have a secure border, and that this is a priority for any nation, including ours and our administration." She has also helped perpetrate the outrageous attacks on our mounted Border Patrol agents in Del Rio, Texas in September 2021, falsely accusing them of behaving like slave owners in a pre-Civil War South, a statement we know now to be patently untrue. Vice President Harris clearly does not take this job seriously. Just yesterday, we learned that Harris has never spoken with current Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens or his predecessor, Raul Ortiz, and yet, even though being appointed to this position to help solve the unmitigated crisis, she refuses to speak to the head of Border Patrol, even on a single occasion. It is also clear that the cartels and would-be border crossers do not take the vice president seriously either. In June 2021, Harris declared in Guatemala, "Do not come," warning people not to cross the border. The following months, more illegal aliens were apprehended at the southwest border than in any months in decades. And new records continue to be set month after month and year after year. There's a reason why Ann Funder, who lost her 15-year-old son Weston in 2022 to fentanyl poisoning, told the RNC last week that she holds not only Joe Biden responsible for his death, but also Kamala Harris. I'll close by quoting Mark Morgan, the former chief of Border Patrol under President Obama and acting CBP commissioner during the Trump administration. He said this week, and I quote, "Vice President Harris has overseen the worst unmitigated border security crisis in our lifetime. Her performance has negatively impacted every aspect of our country's safety and national security and can only be described as a complete failure," end quote. As his vice president, Kamala Harris owns all of the failures on the southern border and the consequences that have resulted from them. America knows it's time to act and acknowledge it too. I support H.Res 1371 and encourage all members to support adoption of this for consideration on the House floor. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Guest. Ranking Member Thompson will now be recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this resolution. However, I had no idea until it was filed that this resolution from the gentlewoman from New York and Republican leadership viewed Vice President Harris's campaign as such a threat that it required an emergency meeting of the House Rules Committee. Let's make no mistake, this resolution is only before this committee because Vice President Harris will be the Democratic nominee for president. Testing new campaign messaging, though, is no emergency, yet that is all this resolution offers. It changes absolutely nothing. It does not even pretend to change anything. I doubt the American people see more talk as an emergency. In reality, House Resolution 1371 is nothing but a second-rate attempt to election interference. The resolution would have you believe the Biden-Harris administration inherited an impenetrable southern border from the former administration. That is just simply not true. The cruel and inhumane policies of the Trump administration did not deter irregular migration. It took a worldwide shutdown caused by COVID-19 pandemic to temporarily reduce the ever-increasing numbers of desperate people seeking freedom, safety, and opportunity in the United States. When global pandemic-era restrictions eased, worldwide migration increased. The United States is far from alone in facing this challenge. When President Biden and Vice President Harris took office, they reversed terrible Trump policies that separated children from their parents and put children in cages. They also increased enforcement, deploying more border surveillance equipment, speeding up immigration processing, removing and returning more people, and implementing tough new policies that have cut the number of border crossers in half over the last 6 weeks alone. Vice President Harris, in particular, has worked to address the root cause of migration, especially in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Improving conditions in Northern Triangle countries mean fewer people compelled to make the journey to the U.S. Under Vice President Harris's leadership, this administration has also improved partnerships with countries in the region and even around the world to increase enforcement and share information. Mexico, for the first time ever, has agreed to accept the return of Venezuelans and Cubans. Under President Trump, we struggled to remove migrants from these countries from the United States. There are also more visa requirements to enter the Western Hemisphere now, making the journey that much more difficult. This administration has recognized that migration is no longer regional, but global, and has taken action. You'll also notice nowhere in my remarks have I referred to the Vice President as a so-called border czar, like this flawed resolution does. This is because such a position does not exist. The authors of this resolution cannot point to a single administration document that names the Vice President the quote, unquote, border czar. This is because such documents do not exist. In fact, I like to read the President Biden's March 2021 remarks announcing Vice President Harris's role. I quote, "The Vice President has agreed, among the multiple other things that I've had her leading, and I appreciate it, agreed to lead our diplomatic efforts and work with those nations to accept the returnees and enhance migration enforcement at their borders," end quote. You'll note that this role is diplomatic. It's about leading partnerships with foreign countries. It's not overseeing the Border Patrol or ICE. That is Secretary Mayorkas's role. In fact, Secretary Mayorkas has clarified to our committee in testimony that this is his job. The border czar title is an invention of overactive Republican imaginations. This resolution is premised on a falsehood. Furthermore, this resolution is incredibly petty. Like the Republicans, don't have enough substance. It criticizes the Vice President for waiting 3 months to visit the southern border after being directed to focus on diplomatic engagements. The Republicans then take issue where she chooses to go. It was Texas, just not where they thought she would be. The resolution criticizes the Vice President for failing to make direct outreach to U.S. Border Patrol chiefs. Again, she was not tasked with overseeing the southwest border. Secretary Mayorkas, their actual boss, speaks to the U.S. Border Patrol regularly. House Resolution 1371 only includes border encounter statistics through May of this year, conveniently failing to include a nearly 30% decrease in encounters between ports of entry in June. The resolution also conveniently fails to mention that since early last month, DHS removed or returned more than 70,000 border crossers to more than 170 countries. This year, DHS has already removed or returned the most people since 2010. Mr. Chairman, the House has better things to do than adopt pointless, false, and politically driven, non-binding resolution. Perhaps, for example, it could legislate on border security in a bipartisan fashion, as the Senate tried to do. That is, before former President Trump told his mega allies to kill the bill so he could run on border security on the campaign trail. See, as much as my Republican colleagues talk about the threats from our border, they don't want to do anything about it, much like this pointless resolution. Taking action is bad politics for them. In fact, under Republican control, the 118th Congress had little to show for itself. Indeed, it's among the least productive in history. Maybe the Republicans are simply waiting to implement the Project 2025 agenda. This resolution is out to score cheap political points rather than change the sorry trajectory of this hapless Congress. I urge my colleagues to oppose this thinly veiled attempt at a political attack, and I welcome the opportunity to answer your questions. And I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair apologizes to the committee for being late, but I do want to thank our witnesses for providing valuable testimony and insight. I'll yield to the Vice Chair of the committee for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I want you to know I had it on total lockdown here. Everything was going really smooth. So just so you know, for the sake of time, I'm going to yield back, but I want to thank both the witnesses for coming here today. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, gentlemen. The gentleman, ranking member is recognized for any thoughts he may have.
Yeah, I keep on hearing borders are, how Russian, but it seems very appropriate coming from my Republican friends. But the very first sentence here says, whereas on March 24th, 2021, President Biden asked Vice President Kamala Harris to serve as the administration's border czar. Mr. Guest, he didn't do that. Where did you get that from? Did you make it up? This is not a true statement, so why is it in the resolution?
I mean, I think clearly she's been referred to throughout media as the board czar.
Well,
And so
no,
while
but-
that may not have been the official
No,
language that
you have
he
referred to her
used.
that, but and maybe extreme right-wing media might have, but that's not what she was appointed to do.
She was appointed to help solve the border crisis, which she
Which
has
she was
clearly
appointed-
failed to do, Mr. Governor.
No,
The border
no, but
crisis
she-
has only gotten worse since her
No,
appointment.
I'm just asking you, like, where did, this is about saying that she's criticizing her as the border czar. She was never appointed as a border czar, never called that. Where is that coming from? I mean, it's made up. I mean, why is it in the resolution? Show me where President Biden said that.
You know, I didn't draft the resolution, Mr. McGovern, but I know that it is well known that she has been referred to repeatedly as the border czar.
You're testifying on behalf of this resolution.
Correct.
So,
And I'm here to defend the resolution.
All right,
That is
so the
correct.
question is, I'm asking you, since you are here to testify on the resolution, where did President Biden announce that Vice President Harris was, quote, the border czar? Where did he say that?
I don't have the information, and I don't know that I could point to a particular time that he's used that phrase.
Well, the reason why you don't have the information is because he didn't. Now, let me ask you a question. I mean, we are here once again for an emergency rules meeting. This is an emergency. So surely we must be considering something that can help stop the flow of fentanyl across our border, or that can make our border more safe, and that can actually do something about this, quote, emergency. So, Mr. Guest, is what we are here to consider today, does this bill include money to secure the border, yes or no?
No, there's been money in the appropriations
Okay.
process, which
All right,
we
so
have
no,
increased
okay.
above and beyond
Yeah.
the president's
Does-
request to secure the border.
Does this bill
This is
include
not a
more
funding
resources?
bill.
Does this bill include more resources, yes or no?
H.R. 2
No,
passed
this bill.
additional
No,
resources,
this
and that
bill.
bill passed the
No,
House and has
this-
sat on Chuck Schumer's
bill.
desk, and he's refused to bring
I'm-
it up in Senate. But in this bill, no, sir, you are correct.
Okay. Does this contain new provisions of law to fix our broken immigration system?
It does
Yes or no?
not.
Okay. Does this resolution prevent violent crime at the border?
Again, this does not, H.R.
Okay.
2
Does it-
accompany those
does
things,
it
and it has
help-
been passed by the House.
Does it help the grieving families of those who were killed at the border.
Again, same answer. H.R. 2 would address those, and that has been refused to be taken up in the
All
Senate.
right. What will this resolution do specifically? Specifically,
It will call her out for her
I didn't finish my
failures.
question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't finish my, what will this resolution do specifically to keep terrorists from crossing onto our soil?
Again, it will call out the vice president for her failures. The Republican House has
So,
passed
okay.
H.R. 2, which would have accomplished all
all
of
right.
the things which you have
So let me
clearly addressed,
let me
Mr.
try to
Governor.
transcribe what you just said. So what you were saying is that this resolution that you are testifying on at an emergency rules committee, that this resolution does absolutely nothing. That's what I'm hearing. This does nothing at all. It's a press release. The only difference between this and the 5 other non-binding resolutions that have been brought through this committee is that you guys have slapped on Vice President Harris's name to it. It's like you hit Control F, search for Biden's name, and replaced it with Harris. And you're afraid. I get it. I get you guys are afraid. The GOP strategists are melting down, the same people who are taking their marching orders from a convicted felon. But clearly, you guys feel that you have to do something. So you're putting another non-binding resolution onto the floor to try to attack the vice president. And you're using the Rules Committee to hold a political rally, because that's what's happening here today. This is, maybe this is an ethics violation, I don't know. Isn't it against the law to use a federal office building to do a campaign rally? I mean, Mr. Chairman, I think this is not based on anything other than just politics. The president, the vice president have reduced unlawful crossings at the border. That's just a fact. They've seized record levels of fentanyl at our ports of entry. They've strengthened the asylum process, and they've worked to secure the border, our towns and our communities. And meanwhile, my Republican friends have actually voted against funding for the border. And they've killed a bipartisan border deal because they're more interested in political resolutions than getting solutions. This is unserious, it's political, and it's a stunt. Now, let me go to Mr. Thompson. And, you know, here are some of the titles that Vice President Harris has held over her distinguished career. She's been District Attorney, Attorney General of California, United States Senator, Vice President. I do not see the title Border Czar amongst these. Has Vice President Harris ever been a border czar? And if she hasn't, what exactly did President ask her to do, and how has that effort gone?
Well, thank you very much. Obviously, in the president's direction for the vice president, he wanted her to do diplomatic associations with countries south of our border. And that's what she did. She did a wonderful job. She's been a good diplomat for those countries, and she's brought back significant resources in terms of jobs and money in that work.
Well, where did the, I'm trying to understand this resolution, because it's the first sentence, you know, said President Biden asked her to serve as the administration's border czar. I mean, did they just make that up?
I have no idea. We don't have it, and obviously, as you know, the Homeland Security Secretary is in charge of managing all of that, but he's not a czar.
Again, I mean, we have a non-binding resolution that does absolutely nothing, and it's filled with just blatant non-truths. That's just, I don't even know where this stuff comes from. They make this stuff up as they go along. Let me ask you, Mr. Thompson, I wish we were here discussing something more substantive than this resolution. But this Republican majority has not been interested in doing substantive work. Despite this, the Biden-Harris administration has tried to work to address the situation on our border. What can you tell us about the policies the Biden-Harris administration has put in place to address the border, and how effective have they been?
Well, several, Mr. Ranking Member. Over the past 3 years, the Biden-Harris administration has put in many policies to secure the border. In June, President Biden announced a new proclamation to address asylum and migrant encounters who are waiting months for any action. The Biden-Harris administration have used their longstanding parole authorities to develop several legal pathways for migrants to be vetted, screened, and processed into the United States. But lastly, the Department of Homeland Security has used over 370 inspection scanners at ports of entry to seize more than 127,000 pounds of narcotics. So they're working, they're making a difference, and I compliment the men and women who are tasked with this responsibility along the border, who obviously put their lives on the line on a daily basis.
So people watching this at home right now might not know it, but there are members of Congress who want to identify and actually implement solutions at the border. Though those members are mostly Democrats. But instead of this exhausting and repetitive practice of finding a new villain to blame, I'd like to ask, how could Congress actually help address the situation at the border?
Well, you know, there was legislation that was promulgated on the Senate side that was offered as a bipartisan gesture to come address those solutions along the border. But as my testimony indicated, former President Trump directed Republicans on the House side not to bring it up because it would make him look bad in his reelection effort, and therefore it was not brought up.
And again, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Guest. Is there anything in here of substance that would help, you know, stop the flow of fentanyl or better secure our borders or do anything at all?
In my opinion, I think it's a messaging resolution that has no resources or no authorities in it to address the problems along the southern border.
And do you think this non-binding resolution rises to the level of an emergency? That we have to have an emergency meeting to get it to the floor tomorrow because it's so vitally important?
Well, I would say if it was an emergency, you would expect some resources to go with the resolution to address the emergency, but there are no resources, no additional authorities to address the so-called emergency.
Yeah. And I'm just fascinated with this kind of manufacturing of the phrase border czar. I couldn't help but overhear one of my Republican colleagues on the Rules Committee who was talking while I was speaking. You know, they said that, well, there's no quotes around border czars, so therefore it's okay to put in a resolution. I've never heard of something so ridiculous in my life. I mean, so everything that's not in quotes is just made up? I mean, like, what is this, you know, I mean, what is the, I just, you know, I'm going to tell you, I mean, this is supposed to be a serious place, and I get it. There are disagreements on how we should deal with the border amongst Democrats and Republicans. There are disagreements amongst Republicans and Republicans on how we should deal with the border. But to say that we have to have an emergency meeting to bring up this, which is filled with lies, I think, quite frankly, degrades this committee and I think this institution. I don't even know why we're doing this, other than because they're afraid because Vice President Harris seems to be doing well, and they got maybe a call from the man who shall not be named to try to make some controversy here. But this is totally unserious, totally sad, totally pathetic. I'm ashamed that we are doing this. You want to bring an immigration bill to the floor? Bring an immigration bill to the floor. You want to bring a bill to deal with whatever aspect of this topic? Bring that to the floor. But to have an emergency? This is an emergency? Give me a break. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Guest, thank you for being here today. And you know, I think it really is important for Congress to remind the American people that it was Vice President Harris who was put in charge of securing the southern border, whatever the issue, whatever you want to call
General
it.
Yield, she was not.
Mr. McGovern, you know, yesterday you criticized me for not yielding to you, but you consistently interrupt me, and you never let me get a full sentence out. And so I'm not going to yield right now,
Okay.
but at some point I will, as soon as I am able to finish a sentence.
If you want, for the record, here's where he was actually tapped her right here.
Okay. And you know what, I'll interrupt my remarks to yield to Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I actually have an AP article here. It's from March 24th, 2021. It's titled, Biden Taps VP Harris to Lead Response to Border Challenges. And it goes on to describe that Biden is putting her in charge of the southern border and also to work with Central American nations to address root causes of the problems. I'd ask unanimous consent that this be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks, and I hope my facts didn't get into anybody's way, but I yield back.
I didn't understand, I mean, what was the point?
Yeah, well, there's an allegation that she wasn't in charge of the border, but Biden named Harris to be in charge of the border. I pulled out an AP article, not exactly a right-leaning publication, from the day that it happened.
Unanimous
mean,
consent request is granted. The gentlelady from Minnesota controls the time. Gentlelady from Minnesota controls
Well,
the
there's
time.
the article, and thank you, Mr. Reschenthaler, for bringing to that our attention. So it's important for Congress to remind the American people that Vice President Harris was put in charge of securing the southern border, and her handling of the border has left it in utter ruin. In my home state of Minnesota, it was discovered that a known terrorist was not only allowed into the country, but was somehow transported to Minnesota and was allowed to live there for 10 months before he was discovered. To this day, the Biden-Harris administration has refused to answer any questions about whether taxpayer dollars were used to transport him to Minnesota. We have terrorists, fentanyl, and murderers, like the one that killed Laken Riley, flooding into this country, and our own Vice President Harris can't even be bothered to pick up the phone and ask our Border Patrol agents what they need to do to stop the chaos. She was given one serious task, and she has failed. You know, as we take a look at it, there was some discussion about, you know, what does this resolution do? You know what? The House Republicans already have done a lot. We passed the Homeland Security Bill on 6/28 that had $600 million to finish the wall, $300 million for border security technology, money for 22,000 more border agents, and as compared to the Senate bill that they pretend is this wonderful answer to all of the border issues, the Senate bill had $20 billion for border security, $60 billion for Ukraine, and roughly another $40 billion for other foreign aid. So it was really just they threw it in as a border security bill so they could secure other foreign aid. It wasn't a security bill. It wasn't a border security bill. It was for foreign aid. We also passed, how many months ago now? H.R. 2. Senate Democrats chose to completely ignore it. Instead, come up with the fake border bill that had more in foreign aid than anything. And so I think it is reasonable for us to point out to the American people what is really going on and the failure of the Biden-Harris administration at securing our border. And I hear about it every day. And I am on the northern border, and that's becoming more and more and more and more of an issue. So Congressman Guest, in your opinion, has Vice President Harris made any serious effort to secure our southern border and make American communities safer?
No, she's been a complete failure, and I would be happy to provide this committee copies of media articles where she's been repeatedly referred to as a border czar. I was not aware that that was going to be a point of contention today, or I would have prepared for that, but I'll be happy to try to get that to you, Mr. McGovern, if you'd like to have that. You know, but if you look through the factual basis of what is in the resolution, I think that those facts are clear and telling. She has not spoken with the current Border Patrol chief. She did not speak with the former Border Patrol chief. 9.7 million illegal immigrants nationwide, 7.9 million southern border, 2 million gotaways. Quoting May, just looking at May, 170,000 illegal immigrants crossed the border in May. This is a 185% increase over the average May encounters. We have seen repeated instances of illegal aliens who have been released into the interior that have committed violent crimes. They've made America less safe. NBC News reported in June of 24 that there were 50 illegal immigrants who were tied to ISIS who had been released into the interior. We know that there were 350 individuals that have been apprehended who were on the terrorist watch list. And so the laundry list of the unsecure border that has been caused under this administration continues to grow. And I think it's important that we call out those individuals who are responsible, whether it be Secretary Mayorkas, who has done a terrible job in his role of securing our border, or Vice President Harris. The administration as a whole, the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of Homeland Security have caused a crisis that has made America less safe. And so that is the basis of this resolution, and that's why this resolution was brought by Ms. Stefanik.
And I thank you very much, Mr. Guest, for bringing it forward. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I'd first yield to the ranking member.
Yeah, so this isn't complicated. The truth is the truth, and lies are lies, right? She's never been appointed to be a border czar. And, you know, I don't know what Mr. Reschenthaler was talking about, but New York Times has, we were talking about articles, New York Times has an article, Why Republicans Keep Calling Kamala Harris the Border Czar. That's the title. And it points out that she was not, in fact, appointed border czar, nor was she tasked with addressing the border problems plaguing the border itself. Rather, she was deputized by President Biden with the diplomatic mission of solving the root causes of migration from countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, tackling the issues that spur people to flee in the first place, like drug violence and lack of economic security. So this resolution is filled with just outright lies. And the gentlelady from Minnesota was bragging about the homeland bills that Republicans passed. Did you send them to the Senate? The answer is no. You didn't even send them to the Senate. How serious are you about dealing with this issue? I mean, and then you come before the Rules Committee in a, quote, emergency meeting with a non-binding resolution filled with lies, and somehow this is a serious attempt to deal with the issue of the border? Look, we get it. You're afraid of her. You know, you're afraid of the fact that Trump is having a meltdown as we meet here because he's afraid he's going to lose. And so, you know, I guess anything is fair game. But I'm going to tell you, you know, the truth is the truth. And this resolution is far from truthful. And I get it, Mr. Guest, that you didn't draft it, but you're up here defending it and making believe like this is something important. This won't even go to the Senate. This won't become law. This doesn't have a dollar to do anything. This is the Republican response? Give me a break. I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you. So I just want to unpack what we're doing here today, what the House MAGA majority is doing here today. Republicans have the majority, and so they get to set the agenda, and that agenda tells you what their priorities are. And their priority, since they took the majority in January 2021, has been to weaponize Congress for political gain. That's why we've seen the least productive Congress in our country's history. We've seen failed bills. We've seen failed speakers, all in pursuit of one of the most extreme legislative agendas this Hill has ever seen. And today, the MAGA majority has called an emergency hearing to pass a do-nothing resolution to condemn the vice president for her alleged failings on a job that never existed. But more on that job later. So we have to note right up front that the resolution before us was filed and given emergency status only after President Biden announced that he was withdrawing from the presidential race and after Vice President Harris became the presumptive nominee. So I'll tell you what the emergency is. The emergency is that House Republicans have wasted a year and a half using congressional resources to attack and investigate President Biden and his family, to help the former president's campaign for revenge. And not only did those investigations come up empty, but now Biden's not the candidate. I'll tell you what the emergency is. House Republicans have wasted a year and a half saying the most important issue in America is a crisis at the southern border. But when they were presented with a bipartisan immigration deal, they turned it down. And when Republicans were presented with a bipartisan border security funding package, they turned it down. So let me tell you, excuse me? Thank you. So I'll tell you what the emergency is. Border crossings are down 54% from the statistics that are included in this sham resolution. I'll tell you what the emergency is. They've been trying to take down President Biden for being old, and now their candidate is the old one. I'll tell you what the emergency is. Vice President Harris, the presumptive Democratic nominee and the person they're trying to smear today, has a history of prosecuting criminals, and you know the rest. So this emergency meeting is nothing more than a campaign hit job against President Harris, Vice President Harris. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. This resolution has no valid legislative purpose. It doesn't do anything at all about the border. It just uses the House of Representatives as a messaging apparatus for Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and it gives every member of the Republican conference an opportunity to bash the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, Vice President Kamala Harris. Americans are sick of this nonsense. Americans want Congress to work for them, but I do think it's worth taking just a second to talk about the real border czar, because there was a border czar. In 2019, former President Trump announced that he was going to appoint the head of ICE, Thomas Homan, as his border czar. Now, Mr. Homan was the architect of the family separation strategy that was implemented by the Trump administration, which separated more than 5,000 children from their parents at the U.S. border, and did so with such disregard for their feelings, for their humanity, with such cruelty that hundreds of them remain separated today because they didn't even track these poor kids. I met some of these kids when I toured the border back on a trip in 2019 as this was all going down, and the faces of the kids who were ripped out of their mom's arms, even after they were returned to their mom, that's going to haunt me forever, and it should haunt everyone here as well. So, we did have a border czar. It was 2019. Trump appointed him. But lest you think that this is ancient history, Homan's one of the authors of Trump's Project 2025. He joined the Heritage Foundation a couple years ago. He's proposed in that roadmap for a second Trump administration that there be mass arrests, detentions, and deportations across the country. Earlier this month, the former president promised to rehire Mr. Homan, and Mr. Homan was asked to speak at the Republican National Convention just a couple days ago. And when he was speaking earlier this month, he said, if Trump comes back in January, I'll be on his heels coming back, and I'll run the biggest deportation force this country has ever seen. They ain't seen shit yet. Wait until 2025, end quote. So if you want to condemn the actual border czar, the architect of family separation, I'm all in. But this resolution is ridiculous, and I think we should move on and get some actual work done. I yield back.
The lady yields back. Chair appreciates the remarks. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I believe this week we're going to be voting on suspension on a bill that is a resolution that would be original jurisdiction in this committee, which is the task force to investigate the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And I saw here that was mentioned in the media that one of the Democrats who might be on this task force is here testifying in front of us today. I want to give him a chance to respond to a few things. I believe it was Mr. Thompson's staffer who suggested that the would-be assassin should have taken shooting lessons. I believe it is Mr. Thompson who has introduced a bill that would, according to his own fact sheet, remove the Secret Service protection from President Trump. I believe it was Mr. Thompson who was very unhelpful in I would go so far as to say, helped the Secret Service when they deleted their phones, helped them to cover up what happened on January 6th, failed to get to the bottom of the pipe bomb investigation. We still have no leads there. And I think I want to give him a chance to respond to all of that, since his name is the only name the Democrat that has been mentioned in the media as serving on this task force.
Well, I thank the gentleman for giving me the time. This notion that the media is somehow the authority baffles me. Just like you were talking about reports on the borders are. All the references had to do with the media. There's no authority to go with it. But more specifically, that employee who made that unfortunate statement is no longer with me. The moment it came up, she was discharged. With reference to the legislation, which was introduced before the former President Trump was convicted, speaks to everyone who is a protectee, that is a convicted felon and is sentenced to jail. That is the only reference in the legislation. So if those 34 counts, felony charges that President Trump has been convicted of, if he's sentenced to jail, then there's no reason for the Secret Service to go to jail with him when he's in the custody of whatever correctional department that's there. So, I mean, that's the point there. When he comes back out, he's fine, he gets it. But the legislation is specific to that. Now, if you read in the media point, that's another point on that. So
you're not concerned about his safety in if he were sentenced to jail? And if
I'm concerned that he's a convicted felon.
what if he were sentenced to house arrest? Would your legislation trigger the removal of his Secret Service protection?
To house arrest?
Yes.
No.
It says on, the fact sheet that you put out, it says upon following conviction.
Yeah, but it doesn't say anything about house arrest.
Yeah, but that would be the conviction. If he's convicted, once you're convicted.
Well, I suggest you read the bill. If you look at the bill, you say that if he's convicted and sentenced to jail, it does not talk about house arrest.
Well, I think I would hope we could be more sensitive to that, and that there wouldn't be any resolutions here in Congress to remove a former president's Secret Service protection under any situation. And I just think it would be inappropriate for somebody who has a culture in the office of his congressional office of suggesting the president's Secret Service should be removed, and having a staffer who suggested that the shooter should have taken shooting lessons. I think it would be inappropriate to have that person serve on this task force. And with that, I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry this phone went off. It was Kamala Harris laughing during 4 interviews, starting with Lester Holt in June of 2023, laughing about the border, laughing about not going to the border. And that's what this country's in a meltdown for. Ms. Thompson, your statement that she has been an effective, you didn't say czar, but effective leader of the border and had some proclamation. What proclamation were you talking about that affected the 15 million people that that have come across this border?
Her mission was diplomatic. It wasn't to secure the border. And what she did, she secured funding as well as increased jobs that came to this country with those negotiations. So in our mind, she was successful.
Okay, well then we just have a different take on success. And the American people, why do 80%, according to whatever poll you want to use, disapprove of what she's not done? I mean, do you think NBC News, is that a conservative outlet? No. Do you think 50 illegal immigrants with ties to ISIS are a laughing matter? Do you think 300, over 350 individuals that appear on the terrorist watch list are a laughing matter? Do you think 31,000 communist Chinese nationals are a laughing matter? So we have every right to highlight her record. She is on different shows laughing about this. And the fact that she is, you know, you talking about the meltdown, Mr. McGovern? Yeah, the Democratic Party's melting down about her because of her record. And it's going to be very interesting. But this is just highlighting what she has not done on the border. She's encouraged the 15 million to come over. She's encouraged all these. And the trafficking that's come with it, she's done nothing other than laugh, which is an insult to the American people. And as far as this being an emergency, you ask anybody in this country if the border is not an emergency, and I think they will tell you it is. And it's it falls at the heels of the person that Joe Biden had picked to control the border. And Mr. Guest, what comment did you make as far as where these, Mr. McGovern, I think raised the issue about where the quote came from, czar? Are we really to the point of a czar? Pick another name for it then.
You know, that's a term that the media has used repeatedly, Mr. Norman, when referring to the role that she was given by the president. That is listed in this resolution, I think, a total of 4 times. And so when you read the resolution as a whole, I've not seen the fact that the facts of the resolution have not been challenged at this point. There has been, the only challenge that has been issued is the use of that term. And again, that was a term that was used by the media. It's not in quotes, but it is in the resolution. Mr. Rushenthaler pointed out that that was a term used by the Associated Press shortly after she received this appointment. And we know that multiple news stations have used that over the last several years. And so at this point, that seems to be the only challenge that I've seen to the resolution is the word czar being listed when describing her role that she was given by the president to help solve the root causes of immigration. And I'll tell you that the statement that she was successful in that, I think is completely erroneous. I think she has been an abysmal failure. The border crisis is not a laughing matter. You talked about in your statement just a moment ago that you've seen video of her repeatedly laughing about what's happening at the border. It is not a laughing matter. It is very serious. I ask those people who have lost loved ones because their loved ones have been the victim of violent crime by those people who have been admitted into the border. We know that the leading cause of death for Americans 18 to 45 is drug overdose, much of that related to fentanyl, which comes across our southern border each and every day. So we have a border crisis. That border crisis under this president, this vice president, has gotten considerably worse than when they took office, and it's important for us to make sure that we continue to call out and we continue to highlight the importance of a secure border.
And would you consider the Pew Research Center back in 2024, 78% of Americans said that this is a crisis? Would the 78% say this is a laughing matter?
I would not think so, no.
Is it a laughing matter about the mother of 5, Ms. Rachel Morin, who's killed by somebody deported 3 times? Is that a laughing matter? She's not living anymore? Or, you know, you can go down the list, but this lady is laughing about something that is killing Americans, fentanyl, the rapes, the child trafficking, and it is a crying shame that my good friends on the other aisle are nitpicking different words. The facts are the facts. And they can deny it, but the American people are not stupid like they think they are.
And I've not heard a challenge yet to the facts yet, Mr. Norman.
No, and they can't do it.
The facts in
They
this
can't.
resolution are wrong or inaccurate.
Well, and we're not even getting into the cost. You know, the $1,156 per taxpayer, 350 million people. And not only that, for this administration, to fly over 400,000, pay for the flight, over 400,000 illegal immigrants into the country is un-American, is what she's doing. I'll yield some time to my good friend, Mr. Massey.
I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. Mr. Thompson, I went and looked back at your legislation that would remove Secret Service protection, And it doesn't say anything about reinstating it after the conviction. It says the protection authorized in paragraphs 1 through 8 shall terminate for any person upon sentencing following conviction for federal or state offense that's punishable for a term of imprisonment of at least a year. You want to,
Well, I'm telling you what the power that's inherent in the DHS secretary is when that person comes back, all that person has to do is reinstate the service.
but yours removes the service.
That's right.
And your legislation doesn't say whether they go to prison or not. It says if they are convicted for an offense that's punishable for a term of imprisonment of at least 1 year. Now, a lot of people get convicted of things that are punishable for a term of imprisonment of at least 1 year and don't go to prison for that. And so what I'm talking about here is this circumstance where your legislation very clearly, whether Trump serves time in jail or not, upon conviction, and he is already convicted, but upon sentencing, regardless of what that sentencing is, upon sentencing, your legislation takes away his Secret Service protection and does not give it back.
He is a convicted felon. He has been tried by his peers and found guilty. I don't think we need to reward a convicted felon with Secret Service protection if they are sentenced to jail. Now, if they are sentenced to house arrest or something like that. But in the normal course of a trial, normally the judge refers that individual to the custody of whatever the correctional facility is.
Would the gentleman from Kentucky?
Yeah, I yield to the attorney.
My read of it and my staff's read of it is as is the gentleman from Kentucky's, that it applies after sentencing and conviction for a crime punishable by a year in prison, but it does not require the prison sentence. It would apply, for example, to a sentence of probation. So I think these are real issues with the legislation. I yield back to the gentleman.
So he could even, receive probation or house arrest and or community service.
Right.
And your legislation would remove his Secret Service protection. And it could be triggered by a state, not even a federal offense. So we would take away federal protection for a duly elected president who served his term based on what some state does, based on your legislation, whether he serves any time or not. I think you should withdraw the legislation. I think you should, it might have sounded good at the time, but I think all of this country sees that it's a very bad idea at this point.
Well, it applies to anyone who's a protectee, not just former President Trump. If any person who's presently a protectee is convicted of a felony and sentenced to jail, they lose protection. It could be former President Obama, it could be former President Bush, or whomever. It has no specific direction to President Trump.
But your fact sheet does. It says, will this bill apply to former President Trump if he's convicted of felony? It doesn't say anything about Obama or Clinton, and it says this measure would apply to former President Trump. We all know, every one of us here, knows that your bill was introduced to remove President Trump's Secret Service protection. The man has just had an assassination attempt on his life, and I think you should withdraw the legislation.
Well, he had Secret Service protection in Butler, Pennsylvania. My legislation would not have prevented that if, in fact, he is sentenced to jail. He will be protected.
But if he's sentenced to probation or community service,
It has no bearing
that is
on
not-
losing the Secret Service.
yeah, that's not what, we all write laws here, and we all know that's not how the legislation reads. So I think it would be a good gesture. It'd bring our country together. It would set the right culture among your staff and everybody else's staff if you would withdraw that legislation.
Let me be clear. We're a nation of laws. Any man that's convicted of 34 felonies and under my legislation and sentenced to jail, then he does not need Secret Service protection in jail because he's under the custody of the Department of Corrections, plain and simple. Now, when he gets out, in the discretion of the Secretary of Homeland Security, he gets it back. I would recommend he gets it back. But I don't think we have to say bad behavior. We need to reward it with Secret Service protection. You are a convicted felon.
Would the gentleman yield?
It's Mr. Norman's time, if you would like to yield to.
Yield.
Don't you believe, Mr. Thompson, that given the fact that one of your staffers had a very murderous sentiment at a very, emotional time for the country with the assassination attempt on President Trump, that it would just be in good faith to withdraw a bill with such a sentiment? I mean, let's face facts. President Carter is about to celebrate his 100th birthday. I have strong doubts that he has a lot of threats on his life, but he has a detail every single day. There are only 46 presidents of the United States in the history of this country, and your staff very publicly called for the killer to have a better shot. That was in your office. Don't you believe it would be in good taste to withdraw this bill at this time? I yield back.
And before you get back to Mr. Norman, I would give you a chance to answer that.
The staffer's comments were unfortunate. She's no longer with me, and that's it. I didn't discuss a private Facebook posting, but when I became aware of it, she's no longer in my employ.
Well, just tying it back to the legislation that would be original jurisdiction of this committee, I do think it would be inappropriate for somebody who's got legislation to remove Secret Service protection from a former president to serve on the committee that's going to investigate the Secret Service and how there was such a lapse in the security of this very same president that he's targeting with his legislation, of the very same president that his staff wished ill thoughts upon in a social media post. With that, I yield back to the gentleman from South Carolina.
Ms. Thompson, you didn't discuss this with your staffer? You didn't know this was coming out?
No,
This just hit you by complete surprise?
absolutely.
And on the legislation that Mr. Massey's talking about, let's say I know Biden is not going to be the nominee, but if they pursue the LLCs that he set up where he's gotten money from China, try him like they did President Trump, should Biden not have should this apply to President?
It applies to any protectee.
But you just happened to name out Mr. Trump.
I did not name it. I was asked, I was assumed, I don't see what he's talking about. But
Yield back to Mr. Massey. You want to read that, Mr. Massey?
well, let me.
Your fact sheet, maybe your legislation doesn't, but I didn't mean to imply your legislation did, but your fact sheet does mention President Trump.
You asked the question. It applies not only to President Trump, but any protectee in the system, no matter who it is. If former President Biden's son goes to jail, he loses that protection under this law. So, I mean, it's not aimed at President Trump. It's aimed at any protectee.
This side of President Trump, the man who was a centimeter from losing his life, this was in here.
No.
President Trump was mentioned in here,
No, but
in your press release.
No, not in my press release. That's wrong.
And can I submit for the record, it's on stationery from Committee on Homeland Security, Ranking Member Benny G. Thompson, a document that where he mentions President Trump would have his Secret Service protection removed based on his legislation.
Ms. Thompson, you presided over the January 6th trial.
Yes, I did.
Why was no cross-examination allowed? Why was Ms. Pelosi not put up, or the Sergeant of Arms put up, or what the record shows, information that was deleted? Why was that not brought up during your hearing? I mean, your question the validity of a resolution showing what Kamala Harris has done on your committee that you are the chairman of. Why was no cross-examination? Is that fair?
Cross-examination of who?
You wouldn't let Ms. Pelosi testify? You wouldn't let,
The committee never sought their testimony.
Would she have come?
You'd have to ask her.
No, I think you ruled that out. I think you would not allow that like you did a lot of the information on that.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is our committee spent almost 2 years looking at what happened on January 6th. It was an unfortunate day. It was not a congressional tour. It was a very dangerous situation. We had people who defended this Capitol who got hurt, men in uniform. We had 141 police officers to get hurt on that day. And I think the work of our committee was outstanding to try to get to the facts and circumstances by which that occurred. And I've been in this institution a long time. It took a lot of effort to bring this institution to where it is now. I respect the right of everybody who comes, but that's not who we are on January 6th.
Did you call up Ray Epps?
Hold on a minute, I can tell you. Yes, Ray Epps was interviewed by the committee.
No, by the committee in the public, on TV? He was shown,
We interviewed over 3,000 people.
no, publicly. Was he called up?
No,
It was not.
He was interviewed by the committee staff.
And Mr. Jordan was taken off, could not sit on the seat, could not be one of the Republicans sit on the staff, nor
Mr. Who?
Jim Jordan, Congressman Jordan.
I had nothing to do with
Okay.
who served
Well,
on the committee.
Anyway, thank you for bringing this resolution, and this is a sad day for the country, what happened to President Trump. This resolution, I think, is highlighting a vice president who has been a total failure at the border, which is causing a lot of the violence and the deaths in this country. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman.
Mr. Chair,
For what purposes, the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
just very, very briefly, just to make 2 points. One is, yesterday, I think everybody on this committee joined in the condemnation of the attempted assassination attempt against the former president. And I was proud to join with the chairman here in issuing a very strong statement. There is no place for political violence in our politics. I do find it, though, a little bit puzzling why we can't get universal condemnation of the violent attack on this Capitol on January 6th. Secondly, to Mr. Guest's point, I just want to be clear of this. Yeah, no, we've criticized the reference to Vice President Harris as a border czar because it's a lie. It's just not true. But we've also taken issue with the bill because it does absolutely nothing, not a single penny to help protect our border.
Chair,
and that's our objection.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Guest, as you alluded to before, House Republicans have in fact passed legislation to directly impact and affect and improve the border in the form of H.R. 2 and frankly other measures. Is that correct?
Correct, H.R. 2, and if you look at the appropriations process, we've appropriated more money than has been requested by the president to try to secure the border, both last year and the bills that have passed out of appropriations so far this year. And we've also sought to hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable by seeking to impeach him, and actually the House did impeach him before he was acquitted without trial in the Senate.
And significantly, with respect to the H.R. 2 legislation, we passed policy measures in that bill to address the enormous deficiencies and frankly outright willful blindness and refusal to secure the border by the President of the United States, by the Secretary of Homeland Security, and yes, by the Vice President of the United States, whom the President tasked with dealing with, at some description, significant aspects of the border security crisis in this country. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
With respect to the Vice President, I would submit for the record a CNN article dated, I think, June of 2021, in which CNN writes, Vice President Kamala Harris endured a rocky first foreign trip since taking office, with sources telling CNN her 2-day swing through Mexico and Guatemala left some administration officials perplexed about what they perceive as her bumpy answers to questions about whether she will go to the U.S.-Mexico border. Several sources say there was real hope inside the White House that Harris's first trip abroad would be a success, and worried that what looked like ill-prepared answers to the inevitable question would overshadow it. And then it goes on to talk about her role, and the extent to which it was a failure. So I'd submit that for the record. But what I would note is this effort to bend over backwards to claim that the president didn't task her specifically with the title border czar, something we have not otherwise claimed. The fact is, it became colloquially known as that. So fine, call it whatever you want to. The president of the United States, a reasonably important position, notwithstanding the fact that the president has been missing for 6 days, the president of the United States of America went to the vice president of the United States of America and said, I want you, Kamala Harris, to take into your daily duties as vice president a significant role in dealing with the border crisis. Is that true?
That is correct. And during her being tasked with that, I want to make sure that we point out again that she made one single visit during the last 3 years to the United States-Mexico border, and she has not spoken with the current chief of the Border Patrol or the former chief of the Border Patrol. And so for her to be able to try to solve the root causes of immigration without talking to the people who were on the front lines dealing with this every day, I think is ludicrous for anyone to be able to make the argument that she has succeeded in her mission.
And exploring that a little further, that stop was in El Paso, Texas, correct?
That is correct.
El Paso, Texas has hardly been the hot spot for the bulk of the traffic that has been coming through primarily. It has had some hotspot moments, particularly of late, but it was not the driving force, which we were seeing at one point during the RGV in the Rio Grande Valley, at one point where we were seeing significantly in Laredo and Del Rio and other spots, at Eagle Pass notably. But the vice president, in taking on this task, even if you accept that she was supposed to engage with the Northern Triangle, with Central America, Mexico, and deal with our engagement with our neighbors to the south, that you would think that the vice president would do something other than, and I want to go back to El Paso, stop in El Paso, literally stop, go do a conference at a fence, by way of fence that Democrats supported and voted for back in the day when that fence was built. It was a Democrat that helped support build that fence. That she went and took a photo op in front of the fence to go to a fundraiser in LA. That's where she was headed. She pit stopped in El Paso. Never went to Laredo, never went to Del Rio, never went to the RGV, never went and sat down. Jason Owens, a great guy, the head of Border Patrol, great guy. I know him, he's a friend. Raul Ortiz did a great job, he's a Border Patrol chief. She hasn't spoken to them. Can you possibly focus on the root causes of the border crisis that has resulted in the death of Americans, the destruction of property, damage to our country, the endangerment of our people, if you don't talk to the people managing the border? Is that possible? Is that remotely possible? Does the gentleman think that's possible?
It is not, and the only reason she went to El Paso was because she was called out on national television
Correct.
by NBC, asking her, had she been to the border, when she intended to visit the border. And I think you're right when you talk about the fact that her border should be viewed only as a photo op. They knew she was coming. She touched down. She went to the border. She had a photo, and then she immediately got on a plane and left. And she really did no due diligence while she was there trying to get to the root causes of what we're seeing that has caused the immigration problem, which I allege is the inaction of this administration. And them rolling back successful Trump-era policies, which she has been a part of.
Is the gentleman aware in that same discussion at CNN that refers to the interview that the vice president had with Lester Holt, in which Mr. Holt asked, at some point, are you going to the border? And she said, at some point, we're going to go to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border. Holt responded, you haven't been to the border. Well, I haven't been to Europe, and I don't understand the point that you're making, Harris said with a laugh. She added, I'm not discounting the importance of the border. Isn't the fact of the matter, the Vice President of the United States, whom the President of the United States gave additional authority and task to go manage the border, had no intention of dealing with the border, that all of this was designed to deflect from the reality that they had a planned policy to literally allow people to be released into the United States. They purposely released people into the United States, abusing the laws, abusing parole. And very specifically, I want to be very specific about this. Laken Riley was killed by someone who was paroled into the United States by the Biden-Harris administration. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the policies, and there were others,
Multiple others.
multiple others. This administration, in which the Vice President of the United States was given additional powers and responsibilities with respect to managing and dealing with the border, in which the Secretary of Homeland Security, who's been appropriately impeached for his failure to secure the border of the United States, who should resign in disgrace today on the back of that impeachment, but also on the absolute failure of the Secret Service, the Vice President of the United States laughed off even physically going to the border and has refused to meet with Border Patrol, the head of Border Patrol, and Americans are dead directly as a consequence of the policy choices that were in direct conflict with the laws of the United States. And that is why we, as Republicans, having passed legislation to fix and secure the border, sent it to the Senate, have Senate Democrats laugh it off, ignore it, try to pass another bill, couldn't even pass it, by the way, couldn't even pass it, that would not only not have secured the border, would have actually made it worse, doubling down on the policies of this administration to release people into the United States, knowing full well that criminals were being released into the United States so that Texans would get killed, so that Laken Riley would get killed in Georgia, so that Rachel Morin would get killed right up the road from right here where we sit in the Capitol building here in Maryland. And by the way, was the second woman to get killed in that very county here in Maryland as a direct result of people let out in the United States. The purpose of this resolution is to make clear to the American people that not just the president, not just the impeached, disgraced Secretary of Homeland Security, but the Vice President of the United States, given specific authority to deal with the border, should be held accountable for her failure and what's that meant for the American people. I appreciate you all bringing that forward. I yield back to the chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Houchin, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On March 24th, 2021, President Biden, as we've heard, named Vice President Harris to lead efforts related to the southern border crisis. Since that time, over 10 million illegal immigrants have crossed the nation's border illegally, coming from over 200 countries. Many of them have been released into the United States and remain in our country even after committing horrific crimes against Americans. This includes people on the terror watch list and more than 1.5 million gotaways. One of these persons of interest on the terror watch list was recently arrested in my home district and transferred to the custody of a court system in Arizona for further processing. Instead of deterring illegal immigration, this administration is making it harder for Border Patrol to arrest and deport criminals, even suing the state of Texas for trying to secure their own border. Chairman Guest, do you know how many times Vice President Harris has visited the southern border since being appointed?
She's made one visit and has yet to speak with either current or the former chief of the Border Patrol during her role to help solve the crisis that we've seen.
So one visit to the border, and she's responsible, named by the president, to lead efforts related to the crisis, and she's visited one time, and she has not yet met with the top officials at Border Patrol. Is that correct?
That's correct. One visit to El Paso, Texas.
One visit to El Paso, Texas. And to be clear, there are a lot of crossings happening in El Paso, Texas, but aren't there other places that are suffering severe influx of illegal migrants crossing the border?
Yes, ma'am, particularly in the Rio Grande Valley. That seems to be a area that continues. We see high numbers of crossings. At the time that the Vice President visited El Paso, there were not significant numbers of crossings at El Paso at that time.
So she's not visited let's see here. Has she visited Uvalde?
No, ma'am.
Has she visited Eagle Pass?
No. Nor McAllen, nor any of the other more busy stations that we see that have a much higher number of immigrants.
I myself have visited the southern border twice, to Uvalde and to Eagle Pass. I witnessed more than 20, just in the moments that probably 60 members of Congress standing on the bank of the river at Eagle Pass witnessed 20 young, able-bodied crossing, 20-somethings crossing into the United States illegally, getting processed, and those folks probably are being released into the interior of the country. She's not even spoken to the Border Patrol chief. Her absence and lack of engagement with this immense responsibility highlights the neglect of this administration and her own neglect. The failure of communication only exacerbates the issue, and really, in my view, it shows an immense disregard for the crisis, and it is a crisis. I have said before that if anyone went to the southern border and saw what I saw, they would declare a national emergency. And this president and vice president just keep doubling down on the problem. The Biden administration and the Vice President Harris, have no intention of stopping the invasion. I support this resolution because I think that the American people deserve leaders who take their named responsibilities, their constitutional responsibilities seriously, and that they will fulfill their duty to protect the nation and its citizens. Chairman Guest, did Vice President Harris swear an oath to protect and defend the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic?
She did.
Do you believe that she is upholding that oath in this current situation with regard to the southern border?
I do not, as it relates to the southern border.
It's important that Congress speak clearly about the failures at the southern border under both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's watch. I'm glad we're considering this resolution today. I'm happy to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Sure, thanks, the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be fairly brief about this. I do want to say this. I went to Guatemala and I believe it was Honduras in 2015. And the leadership of those countries made it very clear that if you want to reduce illegal immigration, stop inviting them to the United States of America. And the one thing that the Biden-Harris administration has done is make it clear to the world that the U.S. border is open. And the only time they changed it is when their poll numbers showed they were going to lose the election to Donald Trump if they didn't do something about it. But for that, the changes that were put in place over the last several weeks would have never been done. And literally, all Joe Biden had to do was nothing when he came in. And the border would have been significantly more secure, and there would have, and millions upon millions of illegal immigrants that have come to this country would not be here today. And they shouldn't be here today. If you're a legal immigrant, you're an asset to this country. If you come here legally and you work, you're a big part of our society, and I think that you coming here legally and working helps make our country better. But if you come here illegally, you're a liability to our country. And what the Biden administration and the Harris administration has done is to make it a whole lot easier to come here illegally than legally. And it's a big disservice to every American citizen, and it's a big disservice to the legal immigrants in this country that are an asset to them. And so I'm not hung on whether we call her the border czar or not. I'm not. I mean, but she has been referred to that in the press, and she has extreme indifference to this issue. And sitting back and doing nothing is simply not an option. And maybe the American citizens need to be reminded that this was her responsibility. Joe Biden made it her responsibility. Whether czar or not is the right term, I can understand why you don't like it. But just factually speaking, Joe Biden said, I'm going to put Vice President Harris in charge. And so there's been discussions about Republicans being afraid of Vice President Harris. I don't think anybody on this side of the aisle is as afraid of anybody running against Trump as we are of the fact that when our agencies in charge of national security go to the White House to meet on a daily basis, they don't have anybody to meet with that's cognitively capable of making the decisions anymore. So I don't have any questions for any of the authors that are here. I'm going to vote for it. I don't care if it says czar or not. The fact of the matter is, she was given a responsibility. She failed in that responsibility, and illegal immigration is a huge liability and a danger to the people of this country.
Does the gentleman yield back? Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for her questions.
Well, you know, I was over in a committee hearing where we were handling bills in an amazing bipartisan fashion. But we had this emergency hearing. So quickly left that hearing, stepped down from the chair as ranking member on there, and came on over here because we have a political emergency. A political emergency, right? That's why we're here. And if you're not afraid of Kamala Harris, why did you have to have an emergency hearing today? Clearly, there are those in the Republican Party who decided they needed to do a campaign ad. And they're going to be using this committee for their campaign ad. And they're going to be using this committee to talk about things in a way that is actually not factually accurate. Because the reality is that there is not an open border. There has never been an open border in the United States. But there has been illegal immigration that has gone on for decades. And for decades, Republicans have been the ones who have stopped every time we try to pass an immigration bill or border bill. The ones who stop it are Republicans, over and over again. And they just did that. They just did that for the political emergency of do not let there be a bipartisan bill coming out of the Senate that might benefit President Biden. It's on their hands. And we were here before. I didn't have time to bring all of the different quotes, but I'm sure they have brought enough of how Republican senators laid it directly on former President Trump's hands that he killed that bill because he did not want there to be a solution. Because they never talk about solutions. Every time we talk about immigration, they never want solutions. They don't want solutions. They want to whine. Whine, whine, whine. That's all we hear from Republicans about the border. They never bring any kind of solutions whatsoever. And then the other thing is, in a non-emergency planned hearing, we were here last night. We were here last night on appropriations bills that they can't even get their own members to vote for. So we spent lots of time last night hearing from people about appropriations bills that they can't get their own members to vote for. So we have to come here for this political ad. I want to yield a couple of minutes to our ranking member, Jim Govern.
Thank you. No, just clarify a couple of things. Mr. Scott says it doesn't matter that it refers to the Vice President incorrectly as border czar or not. I don't know. I'm old-fashioned. I actually believe in the truth. I believe in facts. And I believe that legislation ought to reflect the truth and reflect facts. So I do think that is a big deal. Secondly, she was never put in charge of the border. President Biden's exact words, were that, he appreciates her leading our diplomatic efforts and work with nations to accept returnees and to enhance migration enforcement at their borders. it was more of a diplomatic effort. I mean, that's just what he said, but I guess the truth doesn't matter because it interferes with the political propaganda that my friends are trying to put forward. But our main objection to what you are doing today under an emergency is that this bill does absolutely nothing. Not one additional penny for border security, not one additional penny for law enforcement, nothing, nothing. It is a press release, and a bad press release filled with lies on top of all of that. I mean, this place, my friends are turning this place into, you know, a Congress where trivial issues are getting debated passionately and important ones not at all. And I hear about, oh, but Republicans passed these tough Homeland Security appropriation bills. For 2 years in a row, you haven't sent it to the Senate. 2 years in a row. I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, you ought to replay the hearing here and listen to some of the things that have been said. It's embarrassing what is being said here in this committee. How out of touch you are with your own reality. And so I have to say that, you know, we have an opportunity to actually do some stuff. Our Republican friends in the Senate actually came up with a bill that was a lot, quite frankly, harsher than I would have liked, but we're open to talking about how we could advance something to actually better protect our borders.
Will the gentleman yield?
Happy to yield to the gentlelady.
So I'd just like to note some comments that have been made. Everything that the Democrats have done on the border, we've opposed. Yet on May 11th, 2023, we passed H.R. 2. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez voted no to that bill. 213 Democrats voted no to that bill. You may not have liked it, but that is something that Republicans were trying to do on the southern border. The Senate could not get the bill out of the Senate.
They only got
So I'd just
32
like to
they only
know,
got- they
and
only
when we're
got-
talking about
they only got 32
excuse,
votes in the Senate, so some Republicans didn't go with you either.
right, but 213, I don't think we had a single Democrat vote yes on
It was a
H.R.
lousy
2,
bill,
which was the strongest border bill in history. I yield back.
No, it was a lousy, lousy bill, and you only got 32 votes in the Senate. But in any event, I just find it ironic when I hear my friends talk about the Homeland Security appropriation bills that you keep on passing that are so good that you don't even send over to the Senate. And again, you know, there's an old saying, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And there are some things that we can agree on that, quite frankly, will help better protect our border and better enhance border security. But you're not interested in that. That bill that Senator Langford, hardly a liberal Democrat, proposed over in the Senate may not have been as harsh as all of you may have wanted it. I think it was pretty harsh, by the way. But you know what? That could have advanced. That could have advanced. But you all said no. So here we are. It's an emergency. And again, I hope people understand, this is an emergency. Having an emergency meeting on a bill to criticize Vice President for her role as a border czar, which she never was, so that's a lie. And that's the emergency, and this does nothing else. So this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And isn't it wonderful that that's what we're spending our time with? But anyway, that's the difference between, I think, Democrats and Republicans. We actually want to get stuff done. We want to actually get things over the finish line. You know, and this is really, this is nothing but a talking point after talking point, and it's just getting tired. It's getting tired.
Does the gentleman yield?
Happy to yield to the gentleman.
You expect us to believe that you actually want to secure the border when you have the authority to secure it right now and you've chosen not to?
Well, let me just say to the gentleman, do you think we should believe that you want to secure the border when your solution is a non-binding resolution that does absolutely nothing when you pass appropriation bills and you don't send them over to the Senate? And the only thing you do is you pass this ridiculous H.R. 2 that, quite frankly, you can only get 32 votes for in the Senate. Please, I don't want to hear any
All the
lectures.
president has to do is to put Remain in Mexico back in
I
place.
don't wanna-
He could have done it
I
4
don't-
years ago, and he knows it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I guess there were no crossings when Trump was president, but in any event, we don't want to be lectured by...
I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
By the Republican majority.
Mexico controls.
Do you mean the last time Trump was president or the next time
We
he's
don't-
president?
we
He's
don't-
going to
Actually,
be president again in just a
This
few
is
months.
this is my time, and so I'm going to take it back.
Okay, you can have
I'm
it
going to
back.
take it back, but I am going to point to things, and we'll pull up now, because, you know, I always love introducing into the record stuff that comes from the Cato Institute as an example. And what it was during Trump, just as well as during Bush, just as well as during Obama, that the border and immigration has been an issue that Congress has failed to act on. And part of the reason that Congress has failed to act on is because Republicans refuse to go along with solutions. They refuse to participate in a bipartisan solution. So when you say we are going to get a bill that we know is not going to go anywhere, we are going to pass it, and then say we have done something, that shows you either don't know how you govern here, and listen, I've only been here for this my second term, and you pass things with bipartisan support. That's how you get stuff done for the most part here. And on something like immigration, it needs to be bipartisan. The Senate bill was bipartisan. It had a chance. And you all said, we don't want it because it will give Biden a win, period. That's what was said. And we thought it could be better. Bring it over. Put your amendments. See if you could pass them. But you didn't want that. Because what we hear from Republicans over and over again is they like to whine about a problem. They like to demonize somebody, all those signs of mass deportation. Are you kidding? That's what you do instead of doing anything that makes a difference. You know, the 2021 Cato Institute article, if you want to talk about what happened under Trump, President Trump reduced legal immigration, not illegal. Illegal immigration went up under Trump. I'd like to enter that into the record, Mr. Chair.
Without objections, ordered.
So, Mr. Thompson, there has been so much that we've heard today about this. Can you kind of maybe address some of the inaccuracies that we've heard, the way of framing this that might make a little more sense of why we're here? So I'd like to give you some time.
Well, thank you so much. I think, first of all, this administration has deported more people this year than any year since 2010. So this crisis, we are doing more than since 2010. But I also like to talk a little bit about border encounters. We have actually, I'll read it for you. The number of migrant apprehensions at the U.S.-Mexico border rose up in fiscal year 2019 to its highest annual level in 20 years. The 851,508 apprehensions recorded for October 2018 to 2017 were more than double the number of the years before. The Trump policies did not deter migrants from seeking a better life in the United States. The only deterrent, as I said in my opening statement, was COVID-19, and that's it. But factually, Vice President Harris's mission was to work diplomatically with our allies on the southern border to mitigate the encroachment along the border. So, and she was successful. More importantly, $5.2 billion in private sector investment came because of it. And in fact, CBP encounters with migrants from Central America was reduced by more than 70% since she was given that role. And encounters with migrants from these countries are currently lower than when President Trump left office. So if you look at the statistics, the numbers speak for themselves. She was successful on the mission she was given. Other people are trying to expand the mission for which President Biden did not give her. So she, in our opinion, was successful, but this resolution provides no additional resources for the men and women who work along the border. It does not recommend any additional authority for them to do a better job. And so if there's an emergency, the emergency is that we have not provided additional resources to the men and women who work every day along the border to secure the border.
Right, and as I recall, President Biden sent us over a bill. President Biden sent us over a bill that would have increased the funding for border security, that would have increased the funding for interdiction of fentanyl, and that would have increased the assistance to the countries that were sending asylum seekers and migrants across incredibly dangerous territory to the United States. Because one of the best ways of preventing immigration into the United States, illegal immigration, the presentations at the border, is to get to the root causes, right? And what Vice President was asked to do was to go to those countries and start addressing the root causes. But the speakers of the House did not want to take up the measures that would have addressed root causes, that would have increased funding and resources to our Border Patrol, to interdiction of fentanyl. Republicans killed President Biden's request to address the issues at the border, if I recall. Is that what you recall, Representative Thompson?
Yes, and clearly the bipartisan Senate bill provided additional resources that would have given authorities to secure the border. But as you know, the Republican House refused to bring it up because former President Trump said it would hurt his chances for re-election or election.
I think what they said was dead on arrival. Dead on arrival. We do not want to fix this issue. We just want to complain about it. Is that how, I mean, that's how I see it.
That's correct.
Republicans want to complain about this issue. They do not want to fix the issue of immigration. And then the other thing is, as they demonize immigrants, they talk about crime. The reality is immigrants commit less crime than citizens. That's just simply the reality, right? There are horrific cases across the United States of people who are killed and murdered, and every one of them is hurt. But we know that you can pull out some very, very sad cases. We could also pull out horrible cases. All those mass shootings of the children in the schools, those are citizens with access to the kinds of assault weapons that Republicans refuse to address. So the kinds of murders and deaths and mayhem that we experience is not because of immigrants. They are a very small, much smaller percentage than anyone. There was a New York Times article that was recently done showing that. We also know that another myth they talk about is the role that immigrants play in our society. Bloomberg, immigration to boost U.S. GDP by $7 trillion over the decade. I mean, the reality is those signs that they keep holding up of mass deportation, you want to tank our economy. You want to tank our economy and not recognize that Americans support us coming up with legal pathways for immigration. Americans support our dreamers. Americans want us to address our border, but to do it in a manner that reflects some of the bills that we have proposed and that indeed were bipartisan. The Farm Worker Modernization Act, bipartisan. The Dream and Promise Act, bipartisan. Bipartisan is the way we need to go on immigration, not do-nothing, whining political ads like this resolution is about. Ranking Member Thompson, I think you have a couple of more pieces of actual fact you want to share with us.
Well, thank you very much. I think we ought to get the facts straight on what immigrants do in this country. Not only do immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, contribute more than $450 billion in taxes annually, they will grow the U.S. economy by an extra $7 trillion in the next decade. Former President Trump's mass deportation plan and draconian Project 2025 policies would cost Americans billions. Even some of the right-wing media outlets have reported that President Trump's plan would crush the economy, cost taxpayers $500 billion, and cut our GDP by over $5 trillion over the next 10 years, making us fall behind China. And the other thing is this notion that our immigrant population in this country is committing crime. Well, if you've noticed, crime is really on the decline in this country. And it's former President Donald Trump who actually called for the defunding of the FBI. Well, I don't understand if crime in some folks' mind is rampant, then our premier crime-fighting organization, you want to defund. Well, you can't have it both ways. And I think I compliment the work of our immigrant population. They add to this economy. And I just look forward to that continued enhancement while they're here.
Right. The Dreamers, those mass deportation signs they were holding up, that would mean, and I think they've said they want to get rid of the Dreamers, the deferred action for childhood arrivals. Guess what the Dreamers do? And we love the Dreamers, right? Because they are our neighbors, they are the students, they are our constituents, even if they can't vote for us, right? They earn nearly $27.9 billion in annual wages, and guess what? What they're doing is they're paying that in as Social Security, $2.1 billion, even though they're not going to get a penny of that back. Right? Social Security is being held up by immigrants, right? And once again, we had legislation that was bipartisan, unlike H.R. 2, which was not going anywhere. So every time they hold it up, it's like, you can't put up legislation that isn't going anywhere. You need to work together across the aisle to get stuff done. And they never do that on these big issues. And it only works when you do it. The idea of mass deportation, I need to tell you, I come from an oil and gas region. Guess what? There are a lot of workers in those oil and gas fields that do not have documentation. And my oil and gas companies want us to fix this problem because they don't want that to happen. My ranchers want us to fix this problem because they want to be able to hire people without worrying about whether or not they have their papers. But because Congress has failed to act, they can't do that. Some more facts, Representative Thompson.
Well, I think one of the misconceptions is that somehow immigrants who come to this country illegally or whatever, and draw payments. You know, they pay into the Social Security system if they're employed, but they don't receive benefits. And so they are actually adding to that. And I think that this notion that you want to deport everybody in America who's here does not make sense. It's not rational. There are a lot of economies and jobs in my district that would suffer. I have poultry, catfish, and several other industries that are actually propped up by immigrant labor. And if we just all of a sudden told those people to leave, some of the largest grossing industries in my district would be harmed. And that's not who we are. That's not who our values are as Americans. And I too think that we can work out a solution to the problem, but Democrats and Republicans would have to sit together and work those solutions out.
Right, and work it out and not say it's dead on arrival, but actually work it out. And American voters want that as well. They want us to work on securing the border, providing legal pathways for immigrants, and there is a way to do it, but we need Republicans in the House, in leadership, to not say, we are going to kill those bipartisan deals because it's not good for politics you know, we shouldn't be doing bills like this that are nothing but politics. This is not a bill. This is a resolution. This is a political ad. And I'm sorry that we had to spend 2 hours on this. And given that we have already spent 2 hours on a resolution that does absolutely nothing to solve the problem other than give the Republicans another potential ad or press release, I yield back.
Is there anyone else seeking to testify on House Resolution 1371? Without objection, this closes the hearing portion of the meeting. Without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to call its chair.
Mr. Chair? Why aren't we reporting the bill out? What's the hold? This is a closed rule. I mean, it's a simple closed rule. What do we?
Is it working now?
Now I heard it, I think.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I can tell when, sometimes I have to mess with this. Little short in the wire.
Call the committee to order. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.Res. 1371 strongly condemning the Biden administration and its border czar Kamala Harris's failure to secure the United States border a closed rule. The rule provides that upon adoption of the resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider H.Res. 1371. The rule provides that the amendment printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted and the resolution as amended shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees.
Thank you very much. You've heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
For purposes of Mr. Recognition?
So, Mr. Chairman, this stupid bill just got stupider. Shocker, your non-binding, do-nothing, feckless resolution needed a fix. That's right, your 4-page political emergency resolution wasn't ready for prime time. So let's point out the first change in this last-minute amendment and that is that you admit that we were right. President Biden never, as the original resolution falsely stated, quote, asked Vice President Harris to serve as the administration's border czar, end quote. So we caught you. But you forgot to fix the title. So that falsehood is still in the title. And now the next question is, what else in this resolution is wrong? Because clearly someone is just making stuff up. Maybe the Trump campaign is sending you edits. Maybe the RNC. Are you using official resources to test drive political messaging on the Rules Committee? Meanwhile, nothing at all, not a thing, is being done by this Congress to solve the actual problems at the border or in our immigration system. So congratulations. You got a messaging amendment to your messaging resolution. Wow, great job. Let me just say one final thing on process. There was no amendment deadline, no call for amendments. No member of this House thought they could get an amendment made in order, so none were submitted. Yet, after the hearing ended, a Republican member comes out of a back room with an amendment, and that is magically deemed adopted in this rule. No hearing, no markup, emergency procedures, and now deeming adoption of an amendment that wasn't even submitted until after the Rules Committee hearing ended. So I point that out because I don't want to ever hear any more about regular order from members on the Republican side of this committee. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Hearing no further requests for amendments, the question is on the motion from the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chair, and for the dignity of this committee, I want to ask for a roll call vote.
Roll call vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Reschenthaler, Mrs. Fischbach, Mr. Massey, Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Souchin. Mr. Langworthy. Aye. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leslie Fernandez. Mr. Chairman.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
5 yeas, 2 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, Mr. Reschenthaler will be managing this rule for the majority.
And I'll do it for the minority.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.